Welcome to Enlightened, the enlightened journey of life. I am your host, Jen Hamilton, and it is an honor to have you here. I am a conscious life coach and women's empowerment mentor, and I activate a potent level of self and soul inquiry with my clients, which initiates deep and lasting transformation in all areas of their lives. I am here for the full human experience, authentically and audaciously sharing my magic with the world. On this podcast, we're all about mastering life on the way to enlightenment. And as we are here having a human experience, we might as well embrace it all. We play in the space of what is real and tangible, just as much as we play in the space of esoteric and metaphysical. You'll be ignited by deep conversation, whether through my own personal musings, interviews with incredible thought leaders around the world, and everyday divine humans sharing their soulful stories. Thank you for being on this journey. Let's dive in. Hello, beautiful soul. Just to let you know that listener discretion is advised for this episode and to be mindful if there are kids around, as it contains adult themes. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Enlightened podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Lisa Heacock. She is the proud mother of two adult daughters, Bree and Alexa, and she's the owner of Holistic Life Coaching with Lisa Marie. Lisa is a certified and accredited life coach specializing in personal development and grief coaching. She's a certified grief educator, speaker, and author. After suffering a season of significant loss of loved ones through death, including her niece, her parents, and her 24-year-old son-in-law in a 22-month period, Lisa knew if she was going to survive both physically and mentally, she needed help. Seeking numerous methods, Lisa was able to create a life of purpose and passion around her pain. Now she helps others to do the same. Using her experience, her education, empathy, and intuition, she helps men and women rebuild, transform, and take action to create the life they desire and deserve. As a life coach, Lisa's priority is to create a safe, confidential space for individuals who feel lost, grieving, stressed, anxious, depressed, lacking confidence, or feeling stuck, and need help kicking out the blocks that are keeping them from living the life of power and freedom that they desire and deserve. In this episode, you will hear us talking about some sensitive topics. So just to let you know that we will be touching on themes that you might feel that you need a little support around. So please keep an open mind and remember that if there's anything that's coming up from you, to seek support. So without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm great. Thank you.
Amazing. So as a certified and accredited life coach and certified grief educator, tell us a little bit about what it is that you do. How do you support people through their journey of life?
I specialize in personal development and grief coaching. So I know we're going to get into my story as to how this whole grief coaching and grief educator came into play. But I really have two areas by which I work. So one, in the personal development, people feeling stuck, needing a little bit of a kick. Maybe there's roadblocks. Maybe there's something that's standing in their way to live the life that they are wanting and desiring and dreaming of. And then there's the grief coaching, which is completely different. And yet sometimes they marry each other. But the grief coaching is really witnessing someone's grief, whether that is a loss of a loved one through death or divorce or relationships or community or their health. It is being that safe space for them and trying to get them to move from where they're at now to where they want to be. But it's a very different process in the grief coaching part.
It would be. I'd love to hear your story on how you stepped into this space and what was your experience moving through significant loss to bring you to where you are today.
Yeah. So, growing up, I lost my grandmother and I lost my aunt, but I was young. I didn't, it's not that I wasn't close to them, but I was so young. I didn't really have that sense of grief and loss. So 2018, January, I lost my niece who was in her 30s to a lifelong illness. And a week after she passed away, I got the dreaded call from my mom. So I live in the UK, but I'm from Seattle. So I get a call from my mom in the early mornings. You know, when you get those early morning calls,
Oh, I hate those ones. Yeah.
yeah, late night,
You
early
just
morning.
know. Yeah,
Yeah,
you just
like,
know that it's not okay.
yeah, because it's the middle of the night for her. This is not
Mhm.
good. And she told me that my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer. So, and it was inoperable. And so I really felt like my whole world just opened, that like the earth opened up and swallowed me whole. My dad, I'm very close to my parents. They're wonderful human beings. And so to fast forward, I ended up quitting my job here in the UK and going back to Seattle and caring for my dad until he passed away. And I was also caring for my mom. I mean, they'd been married for years, 50 plus years. So watching that anticipatory grief, knowing that my dad is going to die and watching him slowly die there was a lot of little grief moments, a lot of those times. And then he passed away. I came back to the UK, got a new job, and my mom came to visit me. And it was strange not having my dad around, but it was wonderful having my mom. So we traveled the UK. We went to some of the places that she's always wanted to go. We had a great time, and she stayed for a couple months. And then at the airport, hugged each other. I tried desperately not to cry. I was being strong. She was crying. And it was so hard to see her walk away, you know, without my dad, and just walk away alone, knowing, even though she had a lovely support system, my brother, her grandchildren are all in the States, my brother's side of the family, but it was hard to watch my mom walk away. And little did I know, Jen, that that would be the last time I would hug my mom. A few months later, she passed away in her sleep. So 14 months after my dad, my mom died. And 2 months after my mom died, I got a call in the middle of the night, and it was somebody who was using my daughter's phone. And they said, oh, Alexa is okay, but Jack, who is her fiance, has died in a tragic accident.
Oh my God.
And I can't understand what's being said. I don't know what's happening. What are you talking about? Like, wake up, Lisa, wake up. That's all I kept saying to myself. Like, I don't understand. So I lost my son-in-law 2 months after my mom. And in between all of these significant losses, I lost friends, children. So in a 22-month period, I lost 12 loved ones through death. So, you know, every time you kind of lift your head up, bam, you get hit again with another loss, and you think, oh, can't get worse than this. And sure enough, it just kept happening. So, wow, it was just a real season of loss. And I then went through a divorce as well. So there was a lot that was going on, really. And so I decided I needed help after my mom passed away and before Jack, my son-in-law. So I hired a grief counselor and went through bereavement counseling, and then later hired a life coach. And honestly, it was like, right, this is what I want to do. This is what I need to do. I wasn't focused on the grief coaching part. I was like, nope, because that's heavy, right? I'm like, no, not doing that. I'll do personal development, action, and, you know, I can do that. That's easy. But it was a calling. It was something that was within me that just kept going. This is a calling. You have to do it. And so that's when I became certified and accredited in life coaching and grief coaching.
Wow, what an incredible story and experience. Like, did you ever get to a point where you're just like, what the fuck? Like, where you're just like, I can't take another phone call?
Honestly, like that is exactly the words I used. Was like, what? I
Yeah.
mean, I might have even said actual, like, what the actual fuck is this shit? Like, I don't understand what's happened. It was bad enough with my niece and bad enough with my dad. And then it was like, bam, 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 bam. And I literally remember when I came back from the States, and it was 2 months after my mom died, and I was talking to a friend, and I said, that's enough now. It can't get any worse. Like there's, it just can't. And about, I don't know, 8 hours later, that's when I got the call about Jack. And I thought, that's it. That's me done. But obviously I couldn't be done. I had a daughter I had to care for. I have another daughter. I have family. I have people that I needed to care for. And so I was carrying their grief and mine. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I said that all of the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I bet. I bet. Every time you went through, the phone call, the experience of being told that you'd lost a loved one and then feeling that grief, was it the same type of grief, or were you experiencing it on different levels with different people? How did that show up for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it was a little bit different. I mean, grief is grief and loss is loss. And what I found is what I needed and what I experienced was different with each loss. So I don't want to compare the losses as if one is worse than the other. But what it felt like with compound grief, it's really hard to pick out who to grieve next, what to grieve, because it's all one big shit show, right? And so for me, with my dad, I was grieving that anticipatory grief. So for me, I knew in my head I was crying and grieving each little loss. The sudden losses for me personally, just speaking on my own experience, was the most horrific. There was no goodbyes. There was nothing. It was all shock. Wasn't supposed to happen. There was no what. And my friends lost their only son, 20 years old, in a car accident. And that was on my dad's birthday. And that was before Jack. So for me, these young people as well, that was hard. That was Jack. I feel like Jack was the worst phone call I'd ever had. Losing him and Zach have been some of the worst phone calls that I've experienced. And watching my daughter, who was this carefree, no real problems in the world. She'd been with Jack since she was 16 years old. They'd been together for years. They were soulmates. They were that couple, the ones that were just going to be together forever, that soulmate couple. The one I was not jealous, but, the one I was like, right, I'd like that,
Yeah, yeah.
and that's my daughter. And to see her life shatter, I mean, I don't really have the words for that. So for me personally, I experienced the deepest of pain with losing Jack. So, yeah.
And as a grief educator and counselor and coach, obviously you work with people, who experience mostly loss, I'm assuming, with grief. Is there any advice that you can give if someone receives the call that they don't want to receive in the middle of the night, that hasn't received the call, that hasn't experienced loss and grief before? Is there anything that you can say as to something that they can possibly remember? Like, just take a deep breath, be mindful. Like, or just scream? Like, is there anything you can speak into? Because I've experienced loss before. Not nowhere near as many as you, and nothing. I don't think anything close to me that's been super tragic. It's always been sad, but there's only been a few sort of tragedies, which there were sort of extended friendship circles. And I remember when my father-in-law was passing away from cancer, like it was, we nursed him through this. He went downhill over a period of time. We knew what was happening, and the shock I still went into shock when he passed because I was holding his hand. I went to check his pulse and he'd stopped breathing then. And it hit me and I went into shock and grief, even though I knew exactly what was coming that morning. And I've always been curious, if you get the phone call, or, obviously you're going to have your own response. Your body's going to respond in its own way. Is there something that you could say to people of what to drop into if you remember to when you hear that kind of news?
Yeah, I mean, we go into shock, don't we? Even if we know, like you said with your father-in-law, even if we know it's happening, there's such a deep level of pain, and the shock, it's so hard to say, this is what you should do, or that, because at that moment, it's almost like you can't process what is being said. And then when these kind of shock, even though you're still in shock for quite some time, it's very traumatic, is that you start to kind of come down off of it and you're asking yourself questions. One of the things that I naturally did was tapping. So we had to drive 2 hours to get to my daughter in the middle of the night. And I kept just tapping because but mostly I was like, wake up, Lisa, wake up. But I didn't realize what I was actually doing when I was tapping. But the other thing is exactly that, breathing. I mean, that's literally, there's nothing that you can do that's like, okay, well, this is going to make it less impactful. So I always tell people, you don't have to do anything else. Just breathe. Like, just breathe. There's so much information's coming in depending on who has passed, right? So if it's a parent, you start going, oh my God, we got to do a funeral, and then we've got to go through all their stuff, and we have to go, and so you can launch into, I've got to do all these things. And one thing. And the one thing that you need to think about is just breathing in and out.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And that's so helpful, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, all we have is our breath,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's incredible. When you work with people and, obviously working with a lot of people who've experienced grief, do you see any sort of patterns around people's relationship with loss and grief, like especially in the Western society? The relationship that I see in myself, in my family, in clients as well, the relationship that we have with life and death is very different to some other cultures where, death is a celebration. And, when we get to the point where it can be a celebration, but I find that in the Western world, it's like we just have a relationship. I wouldn't say a poor relationship. I don't want to label it as that, but we have a very different relationship, which we associate it with such heaviness and darkness and denial of, whereas some other cultures, it's a very different experience. What have you noticed through working with people in this space and the Western culture?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, we're just grief illiterate. I mean, we are, and that's really the only way to put it. However, what I am seeing in my, working with clients, majority of my clients are men, which is also surprising in some ways. And yet I'm seeing that there is a shift. There is a change where at least we're recognizing that there's pain and trauma. And so we're becoming more aware. I think we are. And as a grief educator, so I do grief coaching with clients, but then there is that part of educating others. Like, how do we support someone who is going through loss? Like, what are some of the do's and don'ts, things to say, what not to do, like a lot of things of what not to do. And so I think it's really important to kind of educate just on that alone. But you're right. I think the thing is, I think we're not comfortable with people hurting. We're not comfortable with that brokenheartedness. We're not comfortable with the emotion of it. And so what we want to do is like, oh my God, and try to fix something that cannot be fixed, because we love this person. We love these people. This is a loss. And so we try to band-aid it. Like, okay, if we can just do, or some people just stay away from it because they personally can't handle seeing somebody hurting. So it's about educating, be like, it's okay. We need to let all of it out. We need to feel what we need to feel. And then the other part of that is, it's okay to rest and recover. It's okay to go, not today, grief. Like, not, no. Like something comes up, it's like, I just need to put my hoodie over my head and eat popcorn and watch Netflix. Like, you know what I mean? I need to take a nap, right? So part of that is just educating individuals on how to respond to those who are grieving the loss of a loved one through death. So obviously I deal with divorce and all sorts, anything that is loss that causes someone pain, but specifically talking about death.
Yeah, I'd love to hear some of the do's and don'ts for, the people that you have around you going through it. Like, let's go there. What do we do and what do we definitely don't do?
Yeah. Okay. Well, from my own personal experience and from speaking to a ton of different people. So some of the do's that is really, really important is just having what I call big ears, little mouth, right? Syndrome, meaning you just listen and shut your mouth. Like, you don't have to say anything. You're not here to fix anything. You can't. What they want is their loved ones to be back. Then you can't do that. So sitting with somebody and, do you know what? Letting them talk about their loved one. If they feel they want to talk and share, you may be really uncomfortable with that, and it might be really heartbreaking for you. But when you go away, there are grounding techniques. There are things that you can do to work through that, but it isn't about you. So I think that's the other thing to remember. I know it sounds harsh, but this isn't about you. It's about the person who is grieving that you're supporting, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can go do whatever you need to do to get back together, right? One of the things that people will say is, oh, whatever you need, just let me know. And the reality is we don't usually know what we need. So don't ask those questions, because I don't know. So what you do is you sit with them, you make sure they're eating. I mean, simple things like getting friends together, making meals to give to people so that they don't have to think about food. They don't have to think about cleaning their house. They don't have to think about the laundry. They don't have to think about the children. They've got a support system around them. So these are some of the practical things, but I'll tell you, it's just one less thing that they have to think about. So those are some of the do's. Sometimes it's also about taking them out of the place where they're at and going for a walk or coffee or anything. Sometimes they need a distraction. So sometimes it is about asking them if that's something they want, and they go, no, that's fine, leave it. And there's a lot of don'ts, in my opinion. There's a lot of don'ts. I mean, some of the don'ts. Here's some of the don'ts. Don't say they're in a better place.
Oh.
Right? And a lot of times in the religious sector, that's their go-to. Don't say that.
That's
right?
their bypass.
It is. It's like, but like, okay, all better now. No, like they may be somewhere in a better place. I don't know, but they're not with me. So this is shit. So really, that's one. Also, time heals all wounds. Like for me, that one is the biggest bugbear that I've got, because time doesn't heal this wound. It's almost like, as for my experience and others, as time goes on, it makes it even more, they're even more aware how much time has passed that they haven't talked to, hugged, kissed, heard their loved one's voice, it's almost like the void is even longer. And so when we say that, sometimes they have this expectation that, oh, in 2 years, I'll be okay, or in a year, I'll be okay. And when they're not, and it's 15 years or 20 years down the road, and they're like, they get hit by another memory, they think, well, why? Because I'm supposed to be better now. So the time heals all wounds. What we learn to do, and I tell clients this, is we learn to create a life of passion and purpose around our pain. We take it with us. Yes, we can live fully and we can grieve fully, and we can do it hand in hand, and we can do it beautifully. But let's not say that it just heals all wounds with time. And, you know, I think that is the other thing, is that we give time limits on it. After the first anniversary, you know, that's the hardest one. But don't worry, in in 2 years, like I said, you'll feel so much better.
Mm.
You know, these are some of the don'ts, the verbal don'ts. And also, like, let me know if you need me, you know, I'll be here. And what I have found with individuals that are my clients, say, when people say that, they literally aren't around. So if you're going to say, I am here for you, you show up for them. And that's really important. So those are just a few of in my mind, the absolute don'ts. That's not helpful.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. When someone's moving through grief and they're going through the stages of grief, one of them being anger, and they might try to push people away. The person on the receiving end of being pushed away, is it something that they should completely respect, that this person's going through this stage of their grief, and to honor that? Or is it something that they, you know, can almost essentially push past and say, well, no, I'm going to be here and show up for you and be that pillar of strength that I think that you need right now? What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on the relationship, to be honest. But if somebody is kind of pulling away, it's okay. They're okay. You know, checking in with them. Obviously, if you sense that somebody is suicidal or homicidal or, you know, hurting themselves clearly there needs to be action taken, right? We need to step in. But if somebody is pulling away, they're angry, they're pissed off at the world. I was so angry at everything. I mean, things that I'm just like, I'm in a car park and the lift, you know, I can't get out the barrier. And I'm like, you motherfucker. It has nothing to do with the barrier. This literally happened. And my daughter's like, I'll do it, Mom. I'll get him. Don't worry. You just calm down. I was like, I'm going to kill this barrier. I'm just going to ram right through it. So, you know, and then there's times where you're actually angry. Like I was angry at my son-in-law, and he didn't mean to, it was an accident. He didn't mean to die. Of course he didn't. But I was angry that it just happened. You know, I was angry at certain things. So what I would say is this is very natural. It's very common, and people respond in a different way, whether they go inward or they express outward. I've always tried not to be like one of those hurting people hurt people. I try really hard to not do that. But it's okay. They're going to be okay in this sense. Like it's okay to let them feel that. It's okay to let them pull away. Just be there waiting when they come back into, you know, when they want to step back in, just be there and just let them know that you're just there. Like I just am here. I'm in the waiting. I've had, friends say, I'm going to buy some sessions for my friend. She needs, you know, she's pulling away and she needs you. And I was like, no, please save your money. Just be there for her in the waiting. And if she ever does down the road want to talk to me, I'll happily do that. But please do not buy her life coaching packages for grief.
Oh, it's so true, isn't it? Isn't it funny? Because I remember when I was doing my training down in Sydney for theta healing, and there was this woman that was in the class, and her mum was quite unwell, and she was really uncomfortable seeing her mum unwell, which as you would be. And she's like, "Oh, can we send healing to my mum? She's not doing this. She's not following this. She's just, we need to heal her." And it was interesting because the educator, he's such a beautiful man, Mark, his name is, he said, "You know what we're doing today? We're doing the healing on you. So you've got to be able to come to terms with the fact that mum gets to make up her own mind. Mum's doing her based on what it is that she, desires and wants to experience. You're the one that's holding on to something really tightly here." And I was blown away. I was like, oh my God, that's so true, isn't it? Because it's almost like we want other people to have an experience so that we feel better.
Absolutely.
That we want them to be okay because we can't handle the capacity or the depth of the grief that they're, or whatever the emotion is that they're going through, whether it's the anger, the denial, any parts of it, and it's, I reference that often. I come back to it, when my mum had a fall a little while ago, and I remember getting the phone call, and I'd only seen her a couple of days before, and we're quite close, and I'd seen her on the weekend, and her name popped up on a Tuesday night, the following Tuesday, and I thought, oh, that's weird that she's calling me at this time of the night. And it was her in tears, sobbing, and I was like, oh my God, it's my dad. Like, that's where I thought it was that phone call. And she was sobbing, and she said, "I've got some bad news." And I'm just like, oh, here it is. Like, how it just feels like that wrecking ball to the chest feeling. And she said, "Oh, I've had a fall and I'm in hospital." And I thought to myself, oh, thank fuck. Like, as bad as that is.
Did you have to start it like that, Mom? Yeah.
Yeah. And then I remember speaking to my sister afterwards, and she was moving through a lot, just receiving that news. She's quite sensitive and emotional. And I had to end the call with my sister earlier than I wanted to, because she was in just such a state with my mum just having a fall. And I said to her, look, is your partner with you? Can he just be with you? I'm like, I just need to move through this information myself, because not only is a fall meaning surgery for mum, but because of other health complications that she's had, any sort of surgery can lead to further complications. And I go straight into quite logical mode. It's like, okay, what do we need to do? I couldn't go to the hospital. It was during COVID, so she could have no visitors. It was an hour and a half away. My dad couldn't even go in to visit, so there's nothing I could have done. And it's all right. Okay, waiting game, be on the phone. Do I need to post anything to her that she might need? Does she need anything dropped off at the hospital? And just sort of going into that logical space, whereas my sister went sort of straight into it's the end of the world. Yeah. And it's like, well, hang on, do the work around yourself, get really comfortable with the fact that we don't have answers at the moment. Mum's in the best place possible. This is all we can do right now. We can hold intention, if it's about praying, we can pray, whatever the things is, that we can do. And then I actually, earlier this year, I got a voicemail from my mum, and it sounded like the call, "Hey, you need to call me back urgently." And I can tell that she was upset. And I actually, when her number, I was on a coaching call at the time, and I saw her name pop up, and my dad were on holidays in Melbourne. And I thought, oh, what's the bet? They're at the Vic Markets eating donuts, and she's ringing to just rub it in my face that she's eating my favorite food in the world. And then it was like, Dad's in hospital. He's not okay. And he'd had, we thought it was his heart because he'd had chest pain. So it ended up being influenza, COVID. So it was a double whammy. And he ended up being okay, but it was the call, and it was like, okay, I need to get on a plane now to get down there. It was very, very touch and go. And I remember it is that shock. Like, even though luckily he survived this, it was preparing myself for the worst. Like, for him, like, he's 80 this year, for him to come through surviving pneumonia COVID is kind of a big deal. He's an incredible man. And I remember sort of being on the way there, and I'm like, okay, I just need to be prepared for the news. I need to just, not that there's anything, like you said, that you can do specifically, but I'm actually okay. Like the relationship that I personally have with life and death, I work with plant medicine. So I don't know exactly what the death experience is like, but my relationship with death and how I feel that our soul's journey on is very different to perhaps other people. And so I remember just dropping in and just connecting with his soul and just saying, like, Dad, if you're done here, like, that's okay. I'm so proud of you. I love you. Of course, I'm going to miss you. But if I've got no unfinished business with him, and I made sure, after sitting in, medicine ceremonies in the last couple of years, to when I've connected with the souls of my family, thinking to myself, okay, if something was to happen, am I comfortable with that? And am I in a space to say, do you know what, I'm actually, grieving them from a place of I'm happy that I got to have this experience with you, not the, oh my God, I need you back. I can't live my life without you. And I remember being on the plane down to Melbourne, and I was at the airport prior, and I thought, I just want a magazine, like a good magazine. Like I didn't want one of these trashy magazines. All they had was trash. And I forgot to bring my book for the plane, which probably is a good idea because I was reading Journey of Souls. And I was like, okay, maybe that's probably not a good book to be reading. And I remember sitting on the plane listening to music. It's a 2.5-hour flight from Brisbane. And I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, I'll just tune into the entertainment channel on the plane. And I was flicking through the movies. I'm like, oh, none of this appeals to me. And I saw the new Sex and the City pop up. It's called something, I can't remember what it's called. And anyway, this is going to be an absolute spoiler if anyone hasn't watched it. But in the first episode, one of the key characters dies of a heart attack. And I was watching this. I'm like, is this a fucking sick joke? Of all the shows to watch, and now thinking, because at that stage we didn't have a diagnosis for Dad. We thought he'd had a heart attack. And so I was watching this thing and I was like, what even is going on? And it was beautiful because I messaged my best friend who lives in Melbourne, and I said, hey, I'm on my way down. And she's like, what time do you get in? I'll pick you up from the airport. I'll drop you at the hospital. She drove 45 minutes from her place to the airport to drop me 20 minutes into the city and home again. And it was just like, just to see her and hug her on the other end, like that's all I needed. And she's like, I'm here for you. Watch. And she had like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. She had like essential oils in her rollers. Like, she's like, what do you need? What can I bring for you that it's just going to give you some comfort? And I'm like, just you. And, getting to the hospital and then only being able to see Dad through a window because then, because of all the COVID stuff, I was lucky I was even allowed in the hospital. But then seeing him through that, and I think because my default setting is humor. Okay. And so I get to the hospital and I'm joking around with the nurses, and I see Dad in the room, like in isolation behind the door. And I'm like, I got to speak to him through the phone so I could ring him and he could see me from the bed. And I was like, oh, hello, sir. Would you like a beer? We're just doing the rounds,
Yeah, totally.
Smiling. And through humor is how I go through, my experience of things. And I had to be there to support my mum on the journey because she was really moving through a big process, and the shock of it as well. So having to be there and hold space for her for a few days. And then I was like, I'm fine. Like everyone was asking like, oh my God, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, but I don't know if it's going to hit me later. And it's interesting because I was only there for, I think it was about 5 or so days. And then he was able to come out and, sort of do a home quarantine or a hotel quarantine with Mum. And then they spent a bit more time in Melbourne before they could head home. And I headed home, a few days, like the day he came out was the day I was able to go home. And I was fine. Like I was working, like I was still seeing my clients on my calls. I was out and about and I'm like, is this supposed to hit me in a different way? And it wasn't until I got back that I'm like, oh wow, I'm really tired. And that was a lot. And then I sort of sat down to process it and I was like, okay, these are what my feelings are. This is perfectly normal and okay to feel. And what do I need to support myself to move through this? Because I was holding space for my mum, my brother and my sister who were still back in Queensland, family as well. I went to visit some family down there. And just sort of, yeah, being that space holder whilst moving through the idea that, you know, we could lose him at any time. And there's a lot going on, you know, and I think through my work, obviously, you know, as a coach and being in this space and, you know, working with different plant medicines and understanding my own version of life and death, I had the tools there to do it, but not everyone has those tools in their tool belt.
No, you're right. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing, because that, you know, it is sometimes when we get we get this message, right? We get this call. I'm exactly like you. What do we need to do? Research. I'm doing all the research, figuring out what's needed, even though I'm 4,000 miles away, or even when I'm there. What do I need to do? Next, task, do this. Care, support, and carry those around us, but still doing. And you're operating at this level, right? So it makes sense when you come home that it's like, okay, I'm exhausted, of course. And now, like you said, you have the tools to care for yourself. And you're right. So many people don't have that. And they don't necessarily have the same belief system. So I found it very interesting also, depending on the relationship they had with, let's say, their parents. You know, some people lose their parents and it's not a healthy relationship. So there's this grief of the loss of what should have been. So there's all these things wrapped up. I had amazing parents. I had wonderful, amazing parents. I was so, so fortunate and so blessed. So even though I was grieving the physical loss of my parents, like you, I'm so grateful. And I could put my head down on the pillow every single night with no regrets. And I did know that, and I believe the same as you. And so for me, it wasn't necessarily that I thought, oh my God, I can't live without my mom and dad. I was so sad that they were no longer physically here. But as soon as my dad passed, I started seeing signs and synchronicities that I had never seen before, because nobody I knew that was that close. I was seeing things that it was like, right, that can only be my dad, my mom, Jack. Like, I started seeing these things. I started feeling these things. I started smelling these things, all these things, and these signs and synchronicities started happening. And it gives me an enormous amount of peace. And yet the reality is sometimes it just actually sucks and it's just really painful. It's almost like the pain that I feel with losing, let's say, Jack, is because I can see, even though my daughter's resilient, she's powerful, she's got her head screwed on, but seeing her little heart break, and you're a mom and you can't fix that. That to me is just like the absolute worst. We moms want to take care of, fix. I put a Band-Aid on them and fix it. And I knew I couldn't fix it. I could just be present. It's like what you were talking about with your sister and your family members and your mom. You're there to carry and then heal. And the thing is, I think with the trauma of those phone calls, it is traumatic. It is this, like you said, you get hit. And then what do I do with it? And so it is about also when dealing with clients who have lost loved ones, or they haven't actually passed yet, is giving them the tools, that grounding, that can just help them take put one foot in front of the other and to get things done, supporting them as they go through that journey.
Yeah, beautiful. I'd love to hear from you, Lisa, prior to your dad passing and then this domino that happened for you. Did you have a faith in anything? Was it a religious, a God, a spirituality? And or did this come for you later on? Like, did your relationship with any sort of faith change?
Again, very good question. I could go down a huge rabbit hole with that one, but
you can go there.
how much time do you have? So I grew up when I was about 13. My parents started going to church. I have an older brother. He's very zealous in his religion as well. So Christianity was then my home life growing up, and yet something didn't quite sit right with me with some of the religious aspects of it, even though I went to a Christian high school. I went there because I wanted to be a professional soccer player, footballer. And that was a great opportunity for me to stand out. And there were boys that I liked. I mean, let's be honest. So, but I was the little rebellious one as much as I could. I wasn't into drugs or drinking, but I did all the other things like jump out windows and skips class and stuff.
I did that
and
plus the drink drugs.
yeah. I mean, drinking came maybe later in high school, but yeah, but boys were definitely my problem. And and so I had this faith, but when I was probably 35, I was actually a pastor's wife at one point. I mean, my ex-husband and I are like, what the hell was that? Was like it was just like the worst experience for us anyway. And we both actually walked away from religion. We walked away from this faith. I have never walked away from spirituality. I've never walked away from the sense that there's something bigger than me. I didn't see my first medium or psychic until after my dad died. Then my friend, who I trust and love, said, "Oh, you've got to go see John, if you're open to it." And I sat there and I was literally, I couldn't speak. My jaw was on the table, what he was saying and embodying my dad. I'm like, this man doesn't know my dad. He doesn't even know my last name. Like, he couldn't Google this, right? So it was all these things that really propelled me. So for probably 10 years, I had walked away from religion, and yet I would consider myself spiritual. And now I definitely have, I'm way more spiritual than I ever was. And I'm so grateful for that because I feel so in tune with my loved ones.
I can relate to that, like going through loss and grief and viewing the world essentially from a different lens. It's like your whole world just comes crumbling down, and then you go to the shops or you go to a restaurant and everyone's just living their life still. Everyone's just moving forward, and you're just like in this weird time warp of like, what the fuckness?
Yeah.
And, for me, like I've been into, different sort of spirituality. Oh gosh, it's probably about 15 years now. And one of the first things I was ever introduced to was an incredible, like psychic medium. He's quite a big name in Australia. His name is Jason McDonald. He's got about a 1-year waiting list. And I remember going to see him, and he's the type of medium that you can take photos with you. And the people that are alive, you put under a shell. The people that have passed, you put under a rock, and they're upside down the whole time. And then he brings the photo out, still upside down on the table. No way of seeing them. He rubs his hand over it, and he can tell you exactly about the person, what's going on in there. And I was like, okay, I have a sense of comfort. And it wasn't like I had lost anyone super close to me at that time. Like, this is going back a very long time ago. But I think I had like a photo of an uncle, gosh, I can't remember who else was on there. And then like to be able to tell me certain things about my loved ones who were alive, health conditions or bits and pieces, like even down to what the person was wearing. And in fact, in one of the photos, my uncle had a cigarette in the photo, and he picked up this photo. He's like, oh, I can smell smoke. Like he just connected that. And I'm like, you can't make this shit up, right?
No.
There are some incredible psychic mediums out there. I mean, obviously, psychic and mediumship is two very different things. Mm-hmm. And then, like the John Edwards, who was, quite a well-known psychic, had his shows and stuff like that. Like I found so much comfort in knowing that there is the chance to have communication with other people. And one of my closest friends, Cameron, he's an incredible psychic medium. And I've, toured around Australia with him, going to his live shows and stuff. And, to be in the room when he's connecting to people and watching him just purely in his magic, it's just incredible. It's like, how do you do this?
I know.
And then like I got, really curious and started going to ghost tours and that kind of stuff. And then, picking up on things myself because I'm quite intuitive and like mostly clairsentient. But as far as like mediumship, it's not, I learned psychometry many years ago. So where you hold on to a piece of jewelry or car keys of someone and you can have messages come through either from loved ones or intuitively. So I kind of got into that a little while ago and then sort of didn't take it too far. But I remember doing a cemetery tour one time and I could hear voices. Like I could hear people, I could hear names coming. I could hear how people died. It was just like right there kind of thing. And I was like, oh, wow, this is cool. I never really, pursued it. Because obviously I went down the coaching and mentoring field, which is beautiful. And I've actually, like this year, I'd like to study past life regression because that's something that really interests me. And I've also thought, like, if I don't end up, staying as a coach, I'd love to be a death doula because all of this stuff fascinates me. And I truly believe that we do live, many lives and that we're on a soul's journey. And I guess through my belief and my faith, which is, my spirituality, there's no religious faith. But through that, I've made up my own mind about life and death, which essentially gives me that level of like comfort and stability to fall back to when I am going through something that's really, really heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the wonderful part of that is that there's that freedom by which to do it. Whether other people believe it or not, you have had these experiences, and I have had these experiences that I know what I know. And I am pretty logical, pretty rational, and can be emotional. But I also am a thinker and a doer. And if something didn't sit right with me as well in my gut, in my intuition, if it didn't sit right, it wouldn't sit right. And I wouldn't believe it. And if I was sitting in front of a medium and they were saying things and I was like, well, that's not, I wouldn't believe it. But the mediums I've seen too, Kat, she is huge in the UK and she's starting to make her way in the US and she's becoming renowned. This woman is just, I mean, my daughter just had a reading with her and I watched it and I'm like, oh my God, that's it. Like, even though she has had several readings with me, how do you know these things? Like, there's no way. And we have these things that are happening that, my partner has lost his parents and his sister, and his mom and his sister had smoked. And he's like, do you smell the cigarette smoke? And today it happened again. The doorbell rang. No one's there. I'm like, right. Who's screwing with us? Like, it's just stuff like that is now even more so happening. But the reality is that I'm more aware. My eyes are open. My soul is open to seeing these things. It was probably always there, and I just never paid any attention. Yeah. And when my dad died, I was desperate to connect with him, but I also wasn't sure if that was a real thing. I mean, growing up, this is of the devil. And as a matter of fact, when I sat there with John, my dad, he was like, oh, your dad's not real happy he doesn't like me. Like, he said, I wouldn't have chosen this one, Lisa, but he's like, well, here we are. And I thought, that's my dad. That's my dad. Cause normally he'd be like, oh, that's of the devil. Right. But in the spirit world, he's like, well, if this is the only way I'm going to get to talk to my daughter, I'm going to have to go through this guy. I mean, it was just all these things crazy. It was really powerful. Very powerful.
I love it. When my father-in-law passed away, he would come through our phone. So we had like the landline telephone. It was a cordless, so you could press the buttons on it and the buttons would just start making beeping sounds. And then a couple of times, so it was the doorbell as well. So we had one of those doorbells where it's like a transmitter thing, and one thing plugs into like the house where the sound comes out, and then there's just the button on the front door, and they just talk to each other. And all it has, you can't change a setting on it. All it is ding dong. Right? Yeah. That's all you can do is press a button. It goes ding dong. This thing would go off in the middle of the night at random times playing the tune of Yankee Doodle. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, and we're like, what the fuck is that? And I'm like, oh, he's here.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's literally crazy. It is crazy. I think my first sign was when I was at my parents' house, my dad had just passed away. I had plugged an extension cord into the wall and then my phone into that and slept with that right next to my head. I woke up in the morning. It was out of the wall. It was unplugged from it was just me and my mom, and all of it was unplugged. And I was like, Mom, did you come in and unplug this? And I'm thinking, racking my head, like, did I wake up and start unplugging it? And I was like, no, that had to be my dad, because see, my dad would unplug the toaster. Like he watched something on TV one time that said, your house is going to catch on fire. He used to unplug everything. So the fact that my dad is like, Lisa, that's dangerous, like by your head.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Totally.
Thanks, Dad. Got that one. And
exactly.
I've heard that they love it. Like when you realize that and acknowledge them, that, you've noticed that they've been around, like, oh my God, I'll do some more.
Yeah. It's amazing. Story after story of these sorts of things. And so that's why, it is so painful, but there is for me this hope. But not all of my clients believe these. So I don't, I only go where they want to go and where they feel comfortable. And sometimes it's just these practical things of what support do they need from me to help them get to a place where they're able to take a deep breath, and move a bit forward.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's so true, isn't it? How do people find you, Lisa? Tell us about ways in which people can connect with you. If someone's like, oh my gosh, yes, I need to work with Lisa. I need some grief counseling, whether it's, through death. I know we've spoken about death a lot today, but you mentioned, any sort of loss and grief, that can be, divorce, loss of a job, or, a career, or perhaps going through, it could be even accident, losing the loss of your, your legs or parts of your body. Like it's all intertwined. How do people find you and work with you?
Yeah, you're right. It could be any type of loss. So I'm on Instagram at holistic_coach_Lisa. And also Holistic Life Coaching with Lisa Marie. I have a Facebook page. And my website, which is holisticlifecoaching.org.uk. So anybody can message me, and I give, free consultations. I'm sure you do the same, where you just have a call to see if this is actually the right fit, because connection is so important.
It's such a big one. Yeah. You've got to feel that energetic connection, especially, when you go deep with someone, whether it's coaching, counseling, mentoring, moving through grief, whatever it is, you've got to connect with the person that you're working with. Absolutely. 100%. And we will link to all of your things in the show notes as well. And I've got one final question for you, Lisa. To you, what is the meaning of life?
Oh my God. Like that's pretty big, isn't it? Should have sent me that question before we had this call so I could think of something amazing. Do you know what? Let me just think off the cuff, which is what I do. Do you know what? For me, it is, I always go back to how important it is to love. So when I'm going to be starting, and I need to talk to you about this, about starting a podcast, and it's going to be called Because We Love. And for me, that wraps up everything. I know it can sound overused, that word, but when you think about actually loving yourself, loving others, what that encompasses can change the world. And so I just think it's so, so crucial to love both yourself and others around you, and just be that light, right? Like that to me is life.
That is so beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for being on with me today, and just, diving deep into all things grief and loss, and sharing your personal story as well, and just really honoring you for doing the work that you do to support so many other people in this world moving through this. Lisa, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you love the Enlightened podcast, and the biggest compliment you can give me is subscribing to this podcast, sharing it, and leaving a rating and review. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @JenHamiltonOfficial, and the podcast handle is enlightened_podcast. You can also find the video version on YouTube on my channel. Just search Enlightened and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a beautiful day and enjoy living the enlightened journey of life.